Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Miles, chairman of the 2025 Impact Award for Distinguished Financial Journalism. We have two very special guests this evening who are the winners of the award, Casey Ross and Bob Herman, reporters for Stat News, which focuses on health-related topics and has 2 million monthly unique visitors. Now, over the next hour, we're going to talk about how these two individuals executed their award-winning series, Denied by AI. Now, that uncovered how Medicare Advantage insurers have used AI to slash patient care, enabling them to boost profits by millions and millions of dollars annually. The series sparked a major Senate investigation, a federal probe, and two major class action suits, just to mention a few of the impacts. Now, I wanted to start off, we have a lot of younger journalists in this audience, student journalists, undergraduate, graduate school, just graduating, trying to get a job out there. I want both of you to talk about, for about 2 minutes, about why you got into journalism and how you got into financial related topics, and then to investigative reporting, okay? Casey, let's start off with you.
Well, for me, I guess it started with my first news writing class at St. Michael's College, where I went as an undergrad. And as soon as I took the class, I was like, this is what I want to do. And I just instantly uh, loved journalism and loved the idea of it. Loved the idea that you could go out and research something and tell people in the community about something maybe they didn't know about or that they needed to know. I loved that feeling and began writing for the Burlington Free Press, which was the biggest paper in Vermont at the time, before I left college, and then just pursued whatever opportunity I could grab onto after college, and started in the Boston media market at the Patriot Ledger, which was a small sort of suburban paper covering the suburbs south of Boston, and worked my way up through the Boston media market. And an opportunity that came available in financial journalism was on the business desk of the Boston Globe. And so I joined the Globe around 2008, and worked there for 7 or 8 years. And then I got an opportunity to work on the Spotlight team while I was there and
Of
started
course,
in.
the Spotlight team, reminding everybody of the topic of that famous movie, Spotlight, which won the
Right.
Pulitzer
Yeah.
Prize. And
Yes.
you also, work you did for the Spotlight team was a finalist for the Pulitzer.
Yes, I did a series of stories with colleagues at the Globe when I was on the Spotlight team called Shadow Campus, which was about landlords around Boston taking advantage of college kids by stuffing them, into apartment buildings that were way too small and charging them way too much rent. So, and that led to some fatal fires. So, anyways, that was my entree into investigative journalism, and then I signed on at Stat in 2016, and that ended up being my first opportunity really in healthcare journalism, and I've pursued that for the last 10 years.
Great. Of course, Stat also owned by the same person who owns the Boston Globe, billionaire John Henry. Let's talk about you, Bob. Tell us how you got started and why. And you had actually had a little different tack. You were more in healthcare or medical related publications, through the beginning of your career. But talk about that and how it evolved.
Yeah, so I went to college at Butler University in Indianapolis, and I led the student newspaper there. And similar to Casey, you kind of got the bug. If you started writing and talking to people, it was just you get to learn something new every day, and that was your job, and it was just very appealing. And you get to cause some good trouble along the way. I graduated in 2009, which that's when the economy was on fire and there are no journalism jobs anywhere. So maybe it's just been terrible for a really long time. But I eventually found a job in trade journalism, which I didn't really know much about in school. And the topic was healthcare, which I knew nothing about. I couldn't tell the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. I knew nothing. But that's just kind of where I got my feet wet, and you had to learn, or else you didn't have a job. And so I found out I loved it because, the healthcare beat affects everybody at some point. And then I just kind of made my way to other publications. Eventually made my way to Modern Healthcare, and then from there I went to Axios, and as soon as it launched in 2017. And then, that was a ton of fun. I did some reporting there, and then Stat was wanted to expand more. They had obviously done great work with pharmaceuticals and technology and the biopharma space, but they wanted to do more with hospitals and insurance, which was kind of my core beat. And so I joined Stat in 2022, and I've been there since, and it's just been a ton of fun.
That sounds good. Let's talk about the Denied by AI series. Okay, you published that in the second half of 2023. And to remind our audience, we give the Impact Award for any year that a story was published, as long as it's had a major impact. But in 2023, it seems to me you were way ahead of the pack in your coverage of AI in terms of looking at its negative aspects or impact in the workplace. Okay. What were you noticing in terms of what other organizations were doing at the time when you were reporting this story? Because you really started reporting, I think, at the end of 2022 and into 2023.
Yeah, I mean, there was a ton of reporting about AI, and one of the concerns I think I had and that we started to sort of see through the reporting was that the technology, as sold by various companies, was being overmarketed and oversold and overleveraged and used in ways that consumers didn't really appreciate or understand the implications, the impacts of it, how it was being developed, deployed, even when it was being used to make decisions. So this was something that I was kind of on the lookout for. I had sort of wondered, a lot, how are insurance companies using this? And I knew they were using it, but it was unclear how, and it was unclear to what effect until we began to get some tips about this specific tool.
Very interesting. Do you have anything to add to that, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it did start really in 2022. We had heard there was, we'd been in touch with a source in the nursing home industry, and they were just viscerally angry at this thing that was going on. And specifically, they were saying, "Hey, this large Medicare Advantage plan kept cutting off the care of our patients, and they wouldn't tell us why. It was this big black box, but they did cite an algorithm." And so, when I heard that, I went running to Casey and I said, "Hey," like at that time, Casey was, running all of the technology coverage, and um, obviously Casey was immediately interested, and we both sat down with this person, and it kind of snowballed from there. That would kind of that big important tip. But yeah, it started in 2022 when it still felt very nascent, but we kind of knew that, the technology was not all it was cracked up to be.
Very interesting. Uh, uh, how did you come upon this story? The Medicare Advantage health insurers essentially were abusing how they use AI in the treatment of patients and slashing patient care. Which of you heard it first and how? I'll start with you, Bob.
Yeah, so it really did come back to that source that I talked about. This was in 2022, and I'd heard rumblings about this even before then, but didn't pay close enough attention. But then when I came to Stat and this person reached out, I spoke with this person, and then I roped in Casey, and we both spoke with the person, and then we kind of came up with a game plan. We knew that obviously and this person was in the nursing home industry, so you always have to have your skepticism and your guard up because everyone's trying to make money to some degree. But this was a small player, and this was just like a visceral reaction to it. It felt very unfair. And we thought we had to take it seriously, and that's when we kind of came up with a game plan to figure out, okay, who else do we need to talk to? But that's I think the genesis of it was it was a kind of a cold tip, and we kind of just went with it.
Okay, great. I was wondering, how did you divide up the reporting for this story? I think you're the medical guy, and in case you're the AI guy, you're the tech guy. But did you immediately know that was the direction you were going to do in terms of dividing it up, or how?
Yeah, I think we have very complementary skills. Like Bob really understands the business of healthcare, and really understands how the Medicare Advantage business in particular works. And that's the venue in which this technology was being deployed and used. And I understand the technology side of it and had written a bunch of stories about the use of AI in healthcare at that point. So I sort of knew where to look and what questions to ask on the technology side that enabled us to sort of unravel the story. But our expertise is so complementary that it really helped us weave together a story that had the impact that it did.
Did you realize how important the story was initially? Something like oh, this is almost farcical if you actually had healthcare companies doing this, right? With AI. It's just so ridiculous. I'd have to check it out first. Or did you kind of, did the importance of the story evolve, as you got into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we started to kind of peel the layers of it, we started to get more and more intrigued and more disturbed by what we were seeing and what we were hearing from people whose lives were being impacted by the use of this tool. And some of the details were, really kind of alarming and strange. And it just made you want to ask more and more questions. So I think we got more and more um, interested and aware of the potential implications of it as we got deeper.
But
Yeah,
initially, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that first story ran in March of 2023, and I think we knew when we had filed it and was edited and ready to go that we knew it was a pretty big story. But we also included a reader feedback form at the bottom to just kind of call out to readers, hey, if you know more, just reach out to us. And that's kind of also when the floodgates opened a little bit. We started to get tips from, current and former employees who work inside Navy Health and United Health Group, and I definitely think as the year wore on, we started to get better tips and just we realized the magnitude was even greater than we'd thought back in March.
Describe that, the reader feedback form. What is that? It's on the website. What is it? And somebody can write in and identify themselves confidentially, or was that just, you said it broke open the story? And how did it
Yeah,
work?
yeah, exactly. It was like an online form embedded in the story, and if someone wanted to reach out to us anonymously, they would give us their contact information. They would give us the information that they thought was relevant, and then that gave a chance for Casey and I to respond to them. So it was just basically an anonymous tip line to be like, hey, if this interests you and you want to, help us learn and explore more, reach out to us. And it really did attract dozens, I think maybe hundreds of people, Casey. It was really a great tool.
It sounds like a
Yeah.
gold mine. Seems like a gold mine.
Yeah, I mean it was hundreds of people. I mean, it's what does it take these days to get anybody to write an email, if you solicit feedback, it takes quite a lot. In this case, we asked people to tell us about the denials that they'd experienced. And so the fact that we got hundreds and hundreds of responses tells you a little something about how aggrieved people are feeling about the way health insurance works.
That's incredible. How much time did your editors in Boston give you to report on this series? Did they cut you loose for I said, go ahead for 9 months, or do they still require that you did daily stories or what? Bob?
Uh, the beats never sleep, right? So it was still very much, we just worked it into our workflow. Like reporting on hospitals and health insurance for me did not stop. It was our big project. It was something that, like at the end of the day, we were always excited about. But it was just, in the line, it was in the queue of things we had to do. But I definitely think it took priority.
I mean, you worked it into your weekends. I think that's what you mean, right? In terms of making the extra time, based on my own personal experience.
Yeah, nights, weekends, whenever we were thinking about it, absolutely. Whenever people would talk.
Okay. I wanted to talk about the reaction that health insurers, such as United Health Group, had when you asked them for rebuttal to what, obviously was your very negative reporting. What was it? Did they say this is grossly inaccurate? Did they threaten to sue or what?
Yeah, I mean, initially, the response was kind of radio silence. They would not answer any of our specific questions, and we had many of them about the algorithm and how it worked and how it was being deployed. And so they kind of put up a stone wall there. They wouldn't answer any of our questions on the record. They did make available an executive to answer some of our questions on background, but sort of only using vague attribution, like, an executive for the company said kind of thing. But they wouldn't sort of answer anything in the light of day. So we just had to kind of keep digging. That continued throughout the series.
So they basically were relatively initially opaque.
Yeah, completely unresponsive to specific questions. We would send them 20 questions or more about the reporting and what we were finding and what questions we had, and they just wouldn't respond to them directly.
By the way, how much time did you spend with Stat News lawyers to vet your story and prepare it for publication? Was it for each series? Was it maybe one hour phone meeting with lawyers, or several 1 hour phone meetings per story, or how much time did you spend with them to go over it?
Yeah, it was a good amount of time. I mean, with any kind of story that involves, not just large companies, but implications as large as this, you want to make sure everything's buttoned up and accurate and sound. And for every single story that we did, it ran through, our attorneys, and they were involved every step of the way. So I mean,
Oh,
hours for sure.
okay, hours. We talk about hours per story, right? Before it came out. I was wondering, were you ever concerned at all that you would get sued for these stories? Obviously, ABC, CBS have caved in to giant lawsuits from Trump, right? Even billionaires have done that. You're owned by a billionaire. But did you ever have any personal concern or expectation that you might be sued, but you would still be covered?
I think it's always in the back of your mind as a potential outcome of any story like this when, you're dealing with a very large company and you're dealing with allegations as serious as these. That's something that's in the back of your mind for sure as you're going to publication. But in this case, our reporting was so extensive and so thoroughly documented that we felt very confident about what we had to write.
Very interesting. So overall, then, what would you say? Would you say overall, then you were confident that you could handle any suit, or just you hope that you know the your fact checking would be the major protection?
I felt like that it was so well sort of fact checked, documented scrupulously that we wouldn't get to the lawsuit stage, and that if one was filed, that we could very um, vehemently defend it.
Okay, very good. I'm gonna say for my part, I was once myself and a team were sued for $50 million in Business Week magazine, and but we this was in the '80s, but we didn't worry about it because we knew Business Week and McGraw-Hill said they would take it all the way up. But these days are a little bit different, in terms of sometimes how owners treat publications. Uh, uh, One thing that struck me was that you talked about the challenges of sourcing for this story, and I want to talk with Bob first. You talked about one of the biggest challenges was interviewing dozens of employees related to these companies, active employees. Talk about that challenges and how you executed it.
Yeah, I mean, the when you're dealing with stories where, you're talking with people who are currently in their jobs and are talking to you about things that they think are wrong or questionable, like they obviously don't want to lose their source of income. So oftentimes it means you have to talk with them, but then protect their identity, which we did in every single case that we could do. And that's why, and to Casey's point, whenever possible, we wanted to look at documentation because that is it's a bulletproof way to really understand what's going on. And then it backs you up because obviously you want to name people whenever you can. But in lieu of that, and understanding that not everyone can be named because you don't want to, hurt your sources, documentation is the greatest thing you could have. It shows like actual company policies. I mean, it reflects the reality of the situation. And I think that certainly helped. Whenever we spoke with people, we would always say, like, do you have anything that could help solidify? Basically, do you have evidence? And I think that really did carry through our reporting.
You indicated interestingly that a lot of your company's sources became less and less cooperative I think you said, as you went on, right? It was more difficult to work with them, or did I misunderstood you? Your company sources.
I think it depended. I mean, and Casey can talk about some of the sources that he spoke with, one of whom did go on the record. I do think some started to get maybe a little hesitant as we got closer to publication, but overall, like, this involved talking to people often numerous times. It wasn't just one quick phone call and then we were done. It was constant communication over months. And, I think there was just some worry that like, hey, you're not going to use my name kind of thing. And that's just, I think, always what happens in this kind of reporting. They know the gravity of the situation. They just always want to make sure that they're protected.
Okay. Casey, let's talk about your challenges because you indicated that you had to learn. I mean, I don't think you're a math genius, though you're very smart. You said you had to learn how to reverse engineer United Healthcare's algorithm, right? To figure out how they arrived at decisions to slash patient care and costs. Uh, Talk to us about that.
That was one of the most difficult aspects of the reporting because we're reporting about an artificial intelligence tool, that's being used to make decisions, make predictions that were being used to decide whether somebody deserved coverage for their care. And so you want to understand, well, what pieces of data are being used in the algorithm to make these decisions? United's not going to answer any of our questions about that. They wouldn't answer the nursing skilled nursing facilities questions about it. They wouldn't answer our questions about it. So then I had to figure out, how am I going to figure out how does it work? Like, how does this thing make its calculations? And so luckily we got some very committed sources, and I would say people really stuck their neck out to give us information about how this worked. And I had one source who actually showed me how it worked on a screen, so I could look over their shoulder and see what pieces of information were there, how the algorithm was making the calculations. I could get a sense of how it weighted different pieces of information, how when the pieces of information that were inputted into the tool were changed, what different results did that then produce. So I really got a good sense from the sources of how the software, how the AI actually worked.
Okay, so how did it work? Because is this black box bias then? In other words, that the way the algorithm was set up, that it was inherently biased toward slashing, as we know, the stay at all these medical facilities. People would go in and think, oh, I really should be staying for a month, but then they'd be told, no, you got to leave in 16 days, right? So was there bias in that, built-in bias in the algorithm?
Yeah, there was a tremendous amount of bias built into the entire process. What the algorithm does is it takes various pieces of information about a patient. What was the primary diagnosis that you had that caused your hospital stay initially? What other diseases do you have in your medical record? What gender are you? Where do you live? What is your living situation? And then it collects various pieces of information about your physical capabilities. Can you read and understand a newspaper? Can you pick up, a toothbrush? All kinds of different things that would gauge, how sick, how enfeebled the person might be. And then from all of that information, it spits out a calculation about what your expected length of stay in a nursing facility is. And it would compare the patient whose information is being inputted to other patients in a 6 million patient database. And it would sort of compare you to those other patients to produce ultimately this number, this, 16.6 or 17.2 days or 14.3. And so that's fundamentally how it worked.
One thing is that I have to throw in a question from a reader from Catherine Harris that relates to this now, because she said, did readers, the readers who responded to your articles, did they provide information about how the algorithm worked and how it was unfair to the customer? I mean, were the readers directly helpful in that way?
Yes, they were. The problem was, so readers would come to us with information about a denial. Like, my loved one went into a nursing facility in, this state with this condition, and they got this number of days. And then we were told that we couldn't stay there any longer. But the patients did not know that the algorithm was even there, that it was even used. It was never disclosed to them. So it was often difficult to connect the patients with the algorithm. It took additional sources, more documentation in order to sort of triangulate that and figure out when the algorithm was used in a given patient's care and what the result was.
Has that given you any insight? You know, you've gone through this whole period of reporting algorithms on this series. Has your knowledge of algorithms enabled you to discover as a reporter how companies are using algorithms now? So either at in the health sphere, right, or elsewhere, new ways that they're using it.
I think it's definitely given me a much better sense of what are the right questions to ask when you're trying to figure out how is a company deploying a technology, how are they monitoring it, what type of, pre pre-release testing have they done? You really have to understand sort of how to ask questions when they are saying incredibly positive things all of the time about their product, which is what we see in AI all the time. Everybody is saying, it's amazing. It's going to do this. It's going to revolutionize healthcare. It's going to transform this aspect of some corner of industry. And so as a reporter going into that, I think it's really helped me, that story in particular, figure out what are the questions you ask to stress test the claims that are being made.
Very good. Let me get to some other issues, but beforehand, I want to urge your audience again, please send along any questions for the last 20 minutes, and I'll get to as many of them as I can. One thing that both of you pointed out, Bob and Casey, was that health insurers, by using AI in this way, they made a calculated decision that they could outlast patients in any long battle over denials. That the insurers knew that if they denied or slashed patient care, nearly all of the patients who were likely in their 70s or 80s or 90s would not have the ability or energy to fight it through all of the appeal steps, thus ensuring them a profit. Can you expand on that first, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, when again, these were some of the frailest Medicare beneficiaries you can imagine. These were people who could barely walk. So they had a hard enough time taking care of themselves, let alone trying to fight, this payment denial. So oftentimes the burden fell on their families, their sons and daughters, any kind of relatives. And, when they get these denials, they're faced with a pretty horrifying decision. It's either, you fight it, you appeal it, which is time consuming and stressful. Um, and then you pay out of pocket to stay in the nursing home, or you go home, which could be potentially unsafe. It you might not even be ready to go home, so it could just cause all kinds of problems, potentially rehospitalizations. And you're right that this was, I remember I spoke with a nursing home administrator, and they'd seen this over and over again, and they said like the insurance company is making this bet. They're saying that we can outlast you. And oftentimes that was very much the case. There is an appeals process that these patients can take, but very few people take it because either they don't know about it, or if they do, they just don't want to take the time to do it. And oftentimes, if you want to get very far, at some point you're going to need an attorney, and not everyone can do that. They don't know that if there's pro bono attorneys out there. The entire process is just, it's so arduous. It is not consumer friendly. And so people don't even bother fighting it. And there's statistics that show that it's such a small percentage of people do fight it. I think it's under 10%. But if you do, the odds of you getting your adverse determination overruled, it's very high, over 80%. So I think that goes to show that, it oftentimes is worth it if you fight it, but not many people have the time or energy or money to do that.
Yeah, I think, Casey, because you were mentioning some of those numbers earlier, there's something out that only 2% of patients 2% file for judicial reviews within the Medicare system. But I think, what is it, 80 or 90%, 80 or 90% of those who filed won. But that's just that 2%. So 98% give up.
Yeah, I mean, it's Medicare, it's a very small percentage of people that make it farther into Medicare's appeals process. Medicare has a 5-stage appeals process. And so the first 2 stages are pretty quick. You appeal directly to your insurance company, and then you may appeal to what's called a quality improvement organization, which is a third party, which then can give you a relatively quick decision on your appeal. But if you're not satisfied by that point, if you get denied at both stages, then you can appeal to administrative law judge. And that's the stage at which it gets much more expensive and much more difficult to fight it, and the stage at which most people, throw up their hands and give up no matter what the medical or financial consequences are. And they are pretty severe if you need continued care in a nursing facility or some other rehabilitative care facility.
Let's talk about documents versus human reporting, because many investigative stories are driven by the uncovering of documents, and they're the basis of virtually everything. But you have a lot of profiles and examples of human patients in your series. So I was wondering what share of your series was based on documents and what share was, human interviews.
I mean, I would say, I don't know what Bob would say. I mean, I think I remember it being about, 50-50. I mean, we had a tremendous number of documents that really backed up what we were hearing from people in interviews. So the documents really ended up, I think, giving us a ton of confidence to write this in a very authoritative way, because we had internal documents, that showed the metrics that they were using to judge employees. We saw metrics that they were using to sort of gauge the number of appeals that were being filed, what the average length of stay was across different parts of the country. We had the instructions that they were giving to the category of employees that was using the algorithm. So we understood not just the algorithm, but the instructions on how it was to be implemented and the problems that created. So we had really gripping human stories combined with the documentary evidence that I think we needed, and that's what made it, such a powerful piece of reporting in the end.
That's right. You describe actually in detail the plight of a number of patients in your story, such as in part 1, the lead example, Frances Walter, an 85-year-old Wisconsin woman with a shattered left shoulder who is allergic to pain medicine. Now, because of the algorithm, she was forced to leave a medical facility way, way too early. She spent much of her life savings as she fought the decision along several, steps in court. Now, did that come from catching her in person, or did that come out of a court document initially? Where it got you to her, or what? Bob, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and that first story actually shows how it really was a true marriage of human interviews and documentation. Because even going back to that first source that I talked about that just mentioned that this is a problem, it's driving us nuts. We got to see that, like, hey, Humana had sent them this notice saying, it's denied. We're sending this notice of non-payment, and you get to see that. But then, the case you're talking about, Francis Walter. That was a great case. Casey can talk about the sourcing on this, because this was one of the aha moments, I think, for this first story, was finding Christine Huberty. But that's an instance where we talked with someone. She led us to documents, and then it led us to Francis. In case you can talk about this, because you're the one who wound up finding Christine and broke open this first story for sure.
Yeah, Frances Walter was one, or her family was one of the few that that appealed to that third stage of the appeal process to the administrative law judge. And so her family was working with an attorney in northern Wisconsin named Christine Huberty. And Christine Huberty had actually responded to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services had put out a request for information from people on how to improve the Medicare Advantage program. And Christine had written in. And so I was looking through federal comments in response to that request for information that CMS had put out. And her comment was in there. And she was railing about this algorithm being used by NaviHealth and United Health to prematurely remove people from nursing homes. So that's how I came in contact with Christine. And Christine was the lawyer for Francis Walter's family, and she was able to share with me the documents that ended up sort of leading to all the details that are in that story about that case.
And
The
the sake of our audience, by the way, NavaHealth, which is a unit of,
United Health,
yeah, I
yeah,
don't know why they even give it a separate name because it acts like United Health.
yeah,
One thing is that I think both of you mentioned that there were very certain specific documents in the internal appeals process. They were provided extremely important information for your story. Can one of you expand on that?
Yeah, this might refer to the administrative law judge ruling
Okay.
that Christine was able to provide. I mean that was, Casey, you can explain it more, but that type of, legal document is not public because it involves someone's medical information. But that was a key, I think, piece of information that, led us to not only some of the patients, but just to reaffirm that this is happening. It's a big deal. And oh, by the way, there's these judges who actually think these adverse determinations need to be overruled.
Yeah, anything you can tell starting journalists about how to learn how to dig into these kinds of documents,
Well,
other than just beat your head against the wall and learn trial and error?
well, I want to expand on something that Casey said, and I think this is great for any journalist out there, whether you're new or you've been doing this for a while, is if you cover any part of the federal government, you know, and there's a change in a rule or a new regulation, by law, there has to be some kind of public comment period. And it gives the chance for anyone out there to submit their ideas, their thoughts, and it is just a wealth of information in terms of finding people who have grievances, people who have ideas. Um, you know, this federal process is, I think, it actually works for many reasons, but for our sake, it's great because it finds the sources who are on the ground, see the problems before we even do, and then it gives you a great chance to meet them and talk with them.
Anything you want to add, Bob?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what Bob said is right on the money. And I think the important thing is to find somebody that, really does feel aggrieved by something. And, you sort of want to find the source who's shouting at the wall about a behavior or a practice that is causing a lot of harm and wants to talk about it. And, you know, I think in this case, we found a lot of people who felt um, morally injured by what they were encountering in the system and wanted to expose it. And when you find people in that circumstance, I think you have them in a place where you can say, how can you prove it? What can you share with me? And in this case, there was a lot of information that people were willing to share because I think they were so upset by what they were seeing.
Okay. I have one last question before I get to the audience questions. And once again, to the audience, please send along any questions you have over the next few minutes. My last question was that in part 3 of this series, you cited United Healthcare's near exclusive use of AI to drive treatment, and then this is quotes, that legal experts say may violate long-standing case law and regulations that govern Medicare benefits. And I wanted to ask, did the U.S. Attorney, did the Justice Department, or state attorneys general, any of them do any kind of criminal investigation into potential fraud or any other issues?
There hasn't been any kind of large federal suit or pursuit of a case. This is, in relation to that, again, these involve Medicare Advantage plans, and by law, they have to provide the same benefits that someone in traditional Medicare would be getting. And these patients, if they were inappropriately denied care in a nursing home, traditional Medicare allows up to 100 days covered. And obviously, a Medicare Advantage plan would want somebody out sooner because it means that they have to pay out less money. But if that determination was ruled, or if it was determined that these people did not get the same benefits that they would have been entitled to, that it could be a violation of law. There has not been any lawsuits or federal cases on this. But importantly, and Casey mentioned this earlier, or maybe you did as well, Greg, there have been class action lawsuits
Yes.
which are ongoing, and th those are the ones that really, arguably some of the biggest impact because it is aggrieved patients who felt like, in fact, they were told that these were Medicare benefits that they were getting, and they felt like they actually, were not, that the Medicare Advantage company was violating that pact. And so those cases are still working their way through the courts right now.
Okay, great. I want to get to the questions for the audience first. We have another from Catherine Harris. She says that since your reporting has appeared, are you seeing any efforts to push for more transparency in the use of AI tools and capabilities by health insurers to the benefit of consumers? Is anyone or any group pushing for this? And have you reported on this topic? Since you're the AI guy, I'm going to drop that on you, Casey.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of organizations and individuals who are really putting a lot of pressure on insurance companies right now to provide more details about their use of algorithms and AI tools in consequential decisions. One of those is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, which a couple of years ago produced a report. It was based on a survey of insurers that showed how many of them, what percentage of them, and I think it was something like 84% were using AI in their coverage determination processes and in what's broadly referred to as utilization management or making decisions about um, when people are entitled to care and using different cost management techniques that insurers have at their disposal in order to reduce their cost of care. So NAIC is involved, state insurance commissioners in certain states. There's a lot of legislative activity as well. Colorado, California, Connecticut, Pennsylvania is working on a law. So there's a lot of that activity bubbling up, but it really is sort of at the state level that you're seeing some of that activity happen.
Well, as Catherine indicated, has this tangibly benefited consumers thus far, or is it just too early?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's too early. I don't think we have really meaningful regulations as of yet. I mean, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services responded to our story with some additional rulemaking, sort of reemphasizing that, algorithms are not supposed to be substituted for Medicare's very detailed rules about, coverage, and that there's supposed to be an individual determination made in the case of these patients, which, of course, critics of the use of these tools are saying this is the exact opposite. You're just using sort of like blanket rules of thumb and sort of um, um, generalizations contained in broad data sets to make determinations about people instead of really looking at who they are and whether they need the care that they're requesting.
How about you? You want to add anything, Bob?
Yeah, the last point Casey made is a good one. Honest, because this does involve Medicare, the federal government has to be involved to some degree. And the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which oversees Medicare Advantage plans. And during our course of reporting, they did issue more of this rulemaking and guidance and regulations to say, hey, you know, some of it very obvious, right? Where it's like, hey, make sure that technology is not replacing, humans in the loop or actual medical review determinations. Make sure that you have utilization management committees who are, approving this stuff. Make sure the literature behind some of the technology is publicly available. I think it's too early to say whether that has been effective yet. I would argue maybe it hasn't, or if it has, CMS hasn't done a very good job of publishing the results of any of this stuff. But yeah, the federal government ultimately is going to have a major hand in this because it involves a federal program.
Right. I have a question here from a fellow board member, Peter Coy. As you may know, he's an economics journalist. You can see his columns everywhere. Uh, he's asked, did you learn skills in the course of this reporting that have helped you since then? And if so, what? Let's talk about Casey first and then Bob.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there were some things that were reinforced about how you go about developing a story like this. And one of the things that I did in this story that ended up being really helpful to me was I just talked to the sources that were willing to talk to me a ton of times. You know, I just kept going back to them. I had long running conversations with people. We'd get on the phone for hours. If there was something I didn't understand, I would call back and we'd go over it again. And so I just developed pretty deep relationships with people. And sort of, if you don't get the answer the first time, just ask it again and again and again and again until you get the answer. You
So
know,
you learn how to hound more people then on future stories, right, to their detriment.
yeah, and to hound the same people sometimes. You know, so that was part of it. And then, you know, I guess the other is really, um, you know, the document piece of it. That was very tricky because a lot of the documents that we had revealed the people who gave them to us. So we couldn't show them to United, which became a very tricky back and forth with the company because they were sort of up in arms about that. You know, but when I sort of said to them, look, some of these are individual employee performance evaluations. So, you know, obviously I can't share them with you because that would, you know, automatically identify who the source is. So, but that back and forth, you know, can be complicated. And, you know, I think navigating that conversation was something that, you know, there were some definitely some takeaways from that are helpful going forward.
Yeah, really a real art form in terms of human communications and interrelations. Going back to the well again and again. Bob, how about you?
Yeah,
What you learned?
yeah, a lot of stuff that Casey said, I couldn't agree with more. I mean, honestly, journalism is it's a big trust exercise, right? Where you're talking with a lot of people, and these people were sticking their necks out for us, and a story like this and so many others that journalists do, like it takes more than just one or two or three phone calls if it's a bigger story. Like you have to have sources trust you. You have to understand what they're saying and what the documents say. And you know, I do think this is true. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Like you have to make sure that you understand everything, and then go the extra mile to protect your sources. Like if they are willing to communicate with you, and there's a a big trust relationship that's being built. I think it behooves everyone to make sure that that they're protected throughout it.
Right. Got a question here from Michael Paterakis. He's the president of the New York Financial Writers. So I have to ask his question to him if I don't want to. It's a good question. He says that did they encounter, because we talked a lot about the negative impact of AI, but did you encounter any positive use of AI at all by health insurers, even with the rhetoric? There is the rhetoric, but usually sometimes there's some positive way they can use it to be more efficient. But was there any thing positive, or was it really most of the aspects just problematic?
I mean, from what I've encountered so far in covering the insurance industry's use of the technology, one potentially promising element of it is that they are making decisions quicker. That doesn't necessarily mean the decisions that they're making quicker are decisions that are favorable to the consumers, you know, that are subject to those decisions. But I do think that it does open up the possibility of making the bureaucracy work faster and giving the insurers fewer excuses to delay things because they do have technology at their disposal now that can help to adjudicate these decisions a bit quicker. You know, but the fundamental challenge though is still we don't know when and how in what circumstances these tools are being applied, you know, or to what effect on any level. It's all happening behind corporate firewalls. So I think it's incumbent on reporters to really, you know, dig in to the extent we can to try to uncover the impacts of the use of these tools.
So
Some
again,
of
we're
the
talking about the black box, and the issue of creating transparency.
Right. I mean, this is a black box inside a black box. I mean, it's, you know, it's opaque AI algorithms that are being used behind a corporate firewall that can't be really penetrated by any regulation. Nobody's demanding any answers from the federal government or really even at the state level at this point. They're just using them. And we don't know how those algorithms are trained, how they are developed, how they're being monitored, how they're being applied, or to what effect. They're just being used, and we're somewhat in the healthcare space at the mercy of their decisions. I mean, we're going to get bills that we don't understand. We don't understand them to begin with. We know AI is being applied to them now, and coverage determinations that, maybe don't make sense to us. And, maybe an algorithm was used, maybe it wasn't. But I think we know the technology's there. And I think there needs to be some more transparency into that.
Great. Bob,
And
what are
yeah,
your thoughts?
in the course of our reporting, I also think Casey and I spoke with people who were at least maybe sympathetic to what the AI algorithms were trying to do, right? Where it's like, hey, nobody wants to be in a nursing home, right? Like it's just not where anyone wants to be. We all want to be at home. We want to be with our loved ones. And so I think the idea is, hey, what if we had this piece of technology that takes all of your data, takes all of your medical conditions, your demographics, and tries to come up with a plan that works and can get you home as fast as possible. I think the 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 vague idea around that is understandable, but it goes completely off the rails when it treats everybody the same. Like you who maybe cannot walk and can't even go to the bathroom yourself and have, no help at home are not going to be the same as someone who is maybe a little bit more fit, has a good support system. Like it can, in an age of personalized medicine, like if it's just treating everybody as like an average, then what's the benefit to that?
Good point. I've got a question here from Sarah Ernst related to your documents, which I thought was a good question. She said, were the documents that you looked at intuitive to read, or did you need kind of a guide slash source to help you understand what the internal documents meant? I'll give that to you first, Casey, and then you, Bob.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It was a mix. Some of them were plainly understandable, but some of them really needed detailed explanation because there were, a whole bunch of metrics and acronyms that aren't sort of readily apparent. So one of the things that was very helpful to me was talking to the sources who provided the documents and walking through, the context of each one of them to understand, okay, this was given at this meeting and this is how it was talked about and this is what this phrase means and this is how this is being applied to how we're being evaluated by our managers within the company. So there was an awful lot of description that was needed, and luckily in this case we had very deeply informed sources who were willing to take the time to walk us through that.
Yeah, and so we also got video and audio just of some, things that played out behind the scenes. That was, I think, a little bit more straightforward, but if it still involved acronyms or, what does Medicare allow, then it would take an extra, like, hey, now we need to call, a Medicare expert to understand, like, okay, we heard this. Is this compatible with Medicare law? So I think, the goal is to just get the documents and then, once you do I think no matter what, it's going to take a little bit of extra work because nothing is ever as straightforward, especially in corporate America. There's jargon and acronyms, and it does take some time to understand them.
Interesting. Also, you've referred to the person, Casey, who taught you about the algorithms. They were also teaching you about the intuitive aspect of the data, I'm sure, and documents related, right? So she was kind of a translator.
Yeah, we had multiple really good sources. We sort of kind of came into multiple clusters of sources within the company. There were an awful lot of people, and some of them ended up being on the record. Amber Lynch, for example, was a skilled inpatient care coordinator for NAVA Health who ended up going on the record. She was a physical therapist and ended up, working for NAVA Health in this role and became really, disillusioned after she started doing it for a while. Ultimately was terminated in the company. Was willing to talk with us about her experience, but there were a whole bunch of employees who were in a situation where they didn't feel they could be on the record who gave us a lot of time and help in deciphering all of this.
The we have a question from Bob Mitchell, a little bit broader question about execution. And we've talked about the challenges of sources, document sources, human sources. His broader question is, did you hit any roadblocks along the way in developing this story? And how did you overcome those roadblocks? Any broader issues that you'd like to discuss?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest really was, that United wouldn't answer any questions about the way that the algorithm worked. Um, that was a real challenge, and it just took, a lot of sourcing and, pushing sources, to sort of show you, like that, the conversation that unfolded where the person actually showed me over their shoulder, sort of shared their screen with me so that I could see it. Didn't happen until three or four conversations in, with that source. And so that was just the biggest, thing I think we really had to overcome was getting a sense of how does the math work in this equation, and eventually we did get there.
You can see a little bit of a progression in the series as well, right? Where like the first story in March of that year was okay, we've established a problem, and then from there things opened up a little bit, right? Where it's like okay, now we're talking to people in and around the company, so we know there's some internal dissent, and then it moves on from there to I think the third story really was kind of the blockbuster where we really got the documents showing that the algorithm was not just some kind of guide rail, it was actually kind of used as a stick. And that progression, I think it's all, these types of stories are always difficult, but somehow it actually I almost got a little bit easier as it went on because the story got so big, it opened up many more voices for us.
That's great. Last question here to put you on the spot from Catherine Harris. She asked that was there, I think the question is, were there any AI reporting that guided your use or non-use of AI tools for research related to your own reporting? Bob?
So is the question asking if like how I view AI in my own research
Yeah,
now?
no, did it give you ideas for how to use AI in your own reporting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly I don't know. I do think that I think AI could be very valuable in some kind of data aggregation, right? Where it's like, okay, this is a thing that already exists. Let's use it to find the anomalies, to find the patterns, to find the trends. I think there's some value in that. To what extent it's helpful and usable, I honestly I don't know yet. That could be one avenue though.